Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing an oversimplified reaction to Hitler Part 1. It's been a little while since I've seen this episode, but hopefully I can add to it and see what Oversimplified has to say. Let's get started.
Look at this baby. So gentle, so innocent. You'd think this child would grow up to become a good man, an honest man. Well, think again.
Sorry about that.
Hitler was born Adolphus Hitler in 1889 in a small town in Austria-Hungary. His father, Alois Schicklgruber, was born out of wedlock, but eventually changed his name to that of his stepfather, becoming Alois Hitler. Alois was a mid-level Austrian customs officer, not really rolling in cash, but certainly rolling in women. He married a rich, older lady.
So Hitler's father was infamous for having multiple affairs, and this frankly had an impact. I'm pretty sure Hitler's mom was actually like his second cousin or something like that. But he has a pretty promiscuous past when it comes to having sex with women. Adolf Hitler's father.
But then immediately started having affairs, including one with a much younger house servant. A few years later, he left his sick wife to be with his mistress, but since the Catholic Church didn't allow divorce at the time, he couldn't marry her. So he waited for his old wife.
Isn't that crazy that basically in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, the Catholic Church still doesn't allow divorces. The creation of the Church of England because of King Henry was because of divorces. So you can kind of see how the Catholic Church is still kind of having their historical footprints all over things, even as something like Hitler, which you'd never think that the Catholic Church would have an involvement in. But I don't know. I've always found it very silly that the Catholic Church took so long to allow divorces.
Wife to die and had a child in the meantime. Then his wife died, so he married his mistress and had another child. But then his new wife got sick, so he employed his much younger cousin Clara to take care of her.
That's Hitler's mom. Fun fact. He's probably gonna say that like immediately, but thought I'd impose that.
Then when his new wife died, he immediately got Clara, his cousin, pregnant, and then married her. In that order, you rock star. Clara and Alois had 3 children together, who all tragically died while in infancy. So when the 4th child, Adolf, came along, Clara spoiled him rotten. The Hitlers had 2 more kids, and the family moved around a few times, meaning Adolf had to attend 5 different elementary schools. Adolf's father was strict, quick to anger, and took most of it out on the eldest son, until he had enough and ran away at the age of 14, leaving 7-year-old Adolf to do most of the chores and get berated by his father. The result was a
So you can kind of see early on how Hitler's going to create some of his political beliefs. His father is an Austrian customs officer. Well, Hitler, because of the resentment for his father, is going to have a rebellious attitude. He's going to have political beliefs that Hitler, that his father would not believe in. You can kind of see this in teenagers today. If you basically tell them they should believe something, well, they're going to believe in the opposite. This is a very normal occurrence, but it unfortunately led to one of the worst men of all time in his political beliefs, just because of his father and his Austrian beliefs, and simultaneously his father using corporal punishment on him constantly.
A difficult relationship with his dad while he was super attached to his mother, who worried over him and his health excessively. Hitler did well in school at first. His grades were good and his teachers praised him. He was popular with the other kids and enjoyed gathering them together to play war games. He also loved reading and particularly liked stories about
white guys take over everything. Nice touch, Oversimplified.
cowboys and Indians. As he grew older, though, he started to get into trouble. He was caught smoking once, organized a raid on a local orchard, tormented his pro-Austria religion teacher with symbolic gestures, displaying his allegiance to the idea of united Germanic people under a greater German state in defiance of Habsburg.
So if you look at that, that's probably his father speaking from him. No one can really have this strong of political opinions when you're in elementary school, but because of the resentment he held for his father, he's going to do things like show his pro-Germany stances in school to his pro-Austrian teachers just because of the resentment he's held for his father.
Austria, you know, the usual. All of this enraged Adolf's father, who punished him severely. The area of Austria-Hungary that Hitler lived in was once part of the German Confederation. and many of the people who lived there considered themselves to be German. Adolf tended to just go against what
So Germany prior to the unification was actually very fascinating. It actually had multiple basically what were independent states. You had Bavaria, you had Prussia, you had multiple states all under what would eventually be one united Germany. But each of these states had their own local autonomy. They had their own local rulers. So, for instance, King George III, best known for being the king of the United Kingdom during the Revolutionary War, was actually the king of a German state. I believe it was Bavaria. So this is very very interesting because once we have a united Germany, Germany became the primary force in Europe because you had what was essentially a bunch of small empires combining into one huge empire. So that's really one of the main causes of World War One. That's not as talked about as much, just because Germany was the main power in Europe now that it was unified, and the British and French and Russians knew that eventually they would have to be taken care of.
whatever his father said. And since his father was an Austrian public official, Hitler got big into German nationalism.
There you
This
go.
enraged Adolf's father,
Who punished him severely.
Around this time, a family tragedy struck. His 6-year-old brother, whom he loved a lot, died of measles when Adolf was 10 and was buried in the cemetery just across from their home. Around this time, neighbors reported a change in the young boy. Strange behaviors such as talking to trees and staying up late staring at the stars from the cemetery walls. He lost interest in religion and his school grades started to decline, which enraged his father, who punished him severely. It also didn't help that he had just entered high school, and the cool city boys treated him like a rural peasant. He had to repeat a grade and had little interest in most school subjects, instead spending his time...
Isn't that interesting that Adolf Hitler, who would be one of the most important leaders of all time, failed a grade of school? It just goes to show that the modern education system, or just the education system in general, often fails those who really could accomplish a lot if just given the right circumstances.
I'm reading and drawing, which he was quite good at.
Maybe he
One
wanted
day
to
his
become an
father
artist.
said, "Son, someday you'll be a big balls public official like me." And Adolf replied, "No, father, I'm going to become an artist and soar high above the clouds with the eagles." This enraged his father, but by this time he was an old-ass man, so he just sort of...
So you see Hitler being rebellious to his father again. His father wants him to be a bureaucrat, but Hitler, in his quest to be different, decides to be an artist, which, if you can find Hitler's art, you are going to be a multimillionaire because it is actually very sought after. Just think about it's kind of weird being an art collector and saying, oh, I want Hitler's art, but his art is very hard to find, especially because whoever had it at the time thought it was worthless. It would Hitler would do things like he would paint things to try to pay off his debt, or he would just paint things as gifts, and people would think it's virtually worthless because he's just some random artist on the streets. But he fails art school, and he tries to make it as an artist for a couple years, and he ends up just being homeless basically.
let it go, and then died of a lung hemorrhage. Hitler just about passed his final semester and celebrated in the typical way by getting blackout drunk and wiping his ass with the certificate.
That's really funny. I'll have to look that up afterwards. That is actually hilarious. I would love to see the people that night who would eventually understand what Hitler became and give accounts of that night.
However, he didn't take the overall final school exam, instead just dropping out. The now 16-year-old boy was unemployed, without much purpose in life, and for the next 3 years, he stayed that way. He spent most of his time at the opera with his only friend, August Kubizek. Kubizek later wrote his memories of the young Hitler, and said he was passionately interested in many things, felt he was in many ways better than others his age, was...
So you can see this, that Hitler thinks that he's better than people, but simultaneously he's not accomplishing anything in life. So this is where you can see that he's going to start getting resentment, and he's going to start to blame others for not getting what he feels that he rightfully deserves in life. This is where you're going to get the extreme political philosophies of blaming others. This is where he's going to blame the Jews. He's going to blame the communists. He's going to blame anyone who seems to be keeping him from acquiring his true potential, which may or may not be there. But this is what happens when you see people start to blame others for not accomplishing what they feel they rightfully deserve.
Was quick to anger just like his father, and an incredible speaker once he was ranting. When he was 18, he said a very sad goodbye to his mother and went to Vienna to take the entrance exam for art
And
school.
he failed.
He failed.
Yeah.
Soon after, he had to return home. His mother was sick, and her health was rapidly deteriorating. Hitler stayed by her side, and when she eventually died, the family doctor said he had never seen someone so overwhelmed with grief as Hitler was. Then Hitler returned to Vienna, still hoping to find a career in the arts, but he never did. Instead, without parental support, Hitler ended up on the streets. Now in his early 20s, he spent a few rough years living in and out of homeless shelters, making what little he could from selling postcards.
There you go. He's selling his art. Imagine if you had that art today, that would be worth quite a bit.
He painted. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when and how Hitler's extreme ideological beliefs formed, but his time in Vienna would have certainly played a role. Anti-Semitism was widespread in the city. The mayor, whom Hitler supported, was an outspoken anti-Semite. There were many right-wing anti-Semitic newsletters.
You have the anti-Semitic newspapers, you have the anti-Semites all around you, and simultaneously Hitler is in homeless shelters. He's desperate. He's looking for basically any sort of political philosophy that could justify why he's not getting in life, what he's not getting in life, that he feels that he rightfully deserves. And finding scapegoats through these papers, finding people who also feel that they're getting just discriminated against and they aren't getting their fair shot in life. Well, this is why Hitler became Hitler. It's because he started to believe this, and this is only going to be built after his time in the war, when he thinks that the Jews basically stabbed Germany in the back, which I'm sure in probably the next video he'll go over the stabbed in the back myth. But yeah, this is exactly why he would start to gain these crazy political philosophies,
which Hitler took a keen interest in. He bought into the conspiracy theories and became a firm believer in the idea that there are many races in constant struggle with one another, the purest of which were the German Aryan people.
So Nazism in a nutshell is basically there's a constant struggle between all of the races in the world, and the Aryan race is supposedly the superior race, and then from there you have tiers of the race. Below them are like the British, and below them are Southern Europeans, such as Italians and Spanish. And then you have like the Slavs and the Poles, which are below them, and then the lowest of low is the Jews. But it's very fascinating because Hitler would get into constant odds with Mussolini because he believed that the Southern Europeans were an inferior race, but simultaneously Mussolini, being the believer in Italian fascism, he believed that the Southern Europeans were the superior race. So you kind of see them butt heads at each other, but also you can also see why Hitler thought that invading Poland and invading the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe was justified, because they had inferior people, and these people should not be taking up the living space which should rightfully go to the Aryan race. So you see how Hitler's philosophy is being built just by this constant struggle between races, and how he thinks that the Aryans rightfully deserve this living space, but also he's not alone in these political beliefs. While other people, Mussolini in Italy, Francisco Franco in Spain, they also believe that their own people are the superior race to all of this. So you can kind of see how fascism and this hierarchy of races is starting to occur.
And the worst of which, he believed, were Jews. Since Austria-Hungary was a multi-ethnic empire full of lesser races, Hitler wasn't a fan. So when he was 24, he moved to Munich in Germany to avoid doing military service. And for one more year, he was a drifter on the streets, until something huge happened. In 1914, long-standing tensions in Europe erupted into the First World War. Crowds across Europe celebrated the news. Within days,
initially at the start of World War I, everybody thought this was just going to be a grand old adventure, and that this war was going to be basically like a lifetime experience. They learned pretty soon that World War I sucked, and fighting in this war is not going to be fun at all.
Hitler volunteered for the German army. The war gave him a purpose in life. His fellow soldiers gave him friendship and brotherhood. Despite the horrors of war, Hitler considered it to be the best time of his life. He was reportedly a brave soldier and was awarded the Iron Cross. first class. He was also very lucky and had many close encounters with death. His luck ran out in 1960.
So there are multiple historical accounts of Hitler almost dying in World War One, but one of which Hitler actually gave a medal to a British soldier who spared his life. It's when he became Chancellor of Germany. He eventually found this man, and Hitler actually gave a British soldier a medal just because he remembers that Hitler was unarmed and he let him go. And when asked about whether he regrets it, he said he didn't because he could not shoot an unarmed man. And Hitler was that at the time, despite the atrocities that he committed later in life. But just imagine how different the world could have been if Adolf Hitler would have died in World War One. But simultaneously, you could also make the argument that if not Hitler, the rise of right-wing fascism was almost inevitable in some of these places. So it might have been a different leader who wasn't Hitler who would gain the reins. But certainly Hitler, through his speaking prowess, through writing Mein Kampf and other texts, he did become very influential, and he obviously made Germany what it was at the start of World War II.
16, however, when an artillery shell injured his leg. He went back to Germany to recover and was outraged to find a general apathetic anti-war attitude among the exhausted and hungry German populace, with the war turning...
So this pissed off Hitler immensely, but you have to remember that World War I became a war of attrition. It became a war of who could just last the longest. So the Allies, by this time Hitler was wounded, they had ships all around Germany preventing any imports or exports from coming in. So the German people were starving, and they obviously were tired of war. So it makes sense that they would want it to stop, because it became a war that just wasn't going to be fought unconventional ways, and it's just basically who could tire out the populace first.
Against Germany, he returned to the front lines, but was temporarily blinded by a British gas attack in 1918. A month later, still recovering in hospital, Hitler learned of Germany's defeat and surrender.
It made him angry.
The terms of the peace treaty were tough on Germany. It had to pay a lot of money and lose a lot of soldiers. These conditions weakened Germany and humiliated the German people.
The Treaty of Versailles is probably the worst decision in world history. It single-handedly led for extremism to be present in Germany after the war. The fact that they had to give up their military, they had to give up land, they had to pay a ridiculous amount of war reparations to the Allies, which would eventually lead to the Weimar Republic's huge inflation problem, where they would have wheelbarrows of money just to buy a loaf of bread. This could all be attributed back to the Treaty of Versailles, but simultaneously, the stabbed in the back myth would also come out of this treaty, because they thought that the Jews were responsible for Germany losing the war, which is exactly how fascism and how right-wing groups in Germany came to power after the war.
Europe's borders changed after the war too. New countries were formed out of Russia's lost territory. Austria-Hungary was dissolved, and there was one big new country splitting Germany into two. Hitler, seeing the country he loved humiliated like this, said that hatred grew in him for those responsible, by which he meant communists and Jews, who he...
Stabbed in the back myth right here. You see the two people that he blames for all of Germany's woes after the war.
Believed had stabbed Germany in the back by spreading dissent and anti-war propaganda back home.
Okay, well, that's it, everyone. Part 2 is coming tomorrow. Remember to like and subscribe, and again, thank you for your time, and tell me if you want more oversimplified reaction videos. Thanks, y'all.